Imagine going to bed knowing that when you wake up the next morning, if you don't have that drug to put in your body, you will likely not get out of bed. But I was at the point where I realized there was really nothing for me. I had no plan, no network. Family was gone, out of the picture. All bridges were burnt. I was just at the end of the road. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go rob a bank. If I successfully rob the bank, I'm going to take off, go to the other side of the country, go to rehab, restart my life away from everything that I know here and now. If I don't successfully rob the bank, I'll go to prison. It's funny that you ask because I went 5 or 6 days thinking everything was fine.
Prison for you was kind of the wake up moment for you, or wake up call? Welcome to the Mindful Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Van Ness. Today we have a guest that went from robbing a bank, going to prison, being caught for it, and now growing a sales empire. We get to hear a story about how he went in, how he robbed the bank, where the police caught him, and how he went and turned his life around once he got out of prison and on the outside. Let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. You want Luke or Lucas?
Luke.
Lucas. Luke or Lucas? Yeah, now we're live and we got that on it. You go by Luke.
Luke.
Okay,
it is Luke.
Cool. Well, dude, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man.
So fresh out of prison, you just robbed a bank.
Yeah, like 3 days ago, man.
Yeah.
That's how I bought the shirt.
Dude, that's a crazy freaking story. Like, you don't really hear of guys in the entrepreneur world robbing a bank.
No, I figured that was every third episode, man. Yeah.
Was that, so I don't know if you can say this or not. Was that your first one?
Well, if it isn't, we'll just say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, dude, no, it definitely was the first one. So I think, unless you're talking to the George Clooney character, Daniel Ocean, I don't think anybody really plans out robbing a bank. I think the one or two sensational ones that you hear of that they make movies after are the ones that somebody actually did that and they're one in a million. But I think bank robberies happen out of desperation. Somebody just makes the decision that I need money, this is what I'm going to do, and you execute. It's nothing that was well thought out or well planned. I can tell you that.
So what, you just driving home from, hitting the gym and you're like,
well,
you drive by the Chase, and what bank was it, by the way?
So it was North Seneca Federal Savings and Loan. It was a local bank in central New York, and really,
and you had to go for the local one? You couldn't go for like the big boy company?
So they have good security, I learned. The Bank of Americas, the Wells Fargos, those are the ones that really have it dialed in because they get robbed a lot. Places like North Seneca Federal Savings and Loan actually, believe it or not, put their security procedures and policies online where you can access them in PDF.
No way.
I swear to God. Yeah, dude, it was just like a quick search of the bank because I was looking for a layout, and I'm like, oh, so if somebody demands cash, they can't do anything about it. That's literally in their employee handbook. So that was about as well thought out as the research went. I just basically, man, I was addicted to opiates at the time, and everybody then presumes, oh, you were super high, so you went in there all faded and robbed the bank, and that was not the case at all. I was actually in withdrawals. I couldn't get the drug. I didn't have any money, and if you know anything about opiate addiction, you know that if you don't have the drug, the phrase they use is your tank's on E, meaning there's no gas in the tank, there's no energy, you feel sick. They call it dope sick. Very similar to heroin withdrawals because the drugs are very similar. Synthetic opioids and opiates they're both derivatives of the opium sequence of the chemical structure, molecular structure. So it affects the body the same way. And when you don't have the drug after your body's used to having it, you get extremely ill. To the point where addicts are less concerned about getting high throughout the day, most of them, more concerned about making sure there are pills or heroin in their pocket when they go to bed at night, so when they wake up in the morning, they can actually get out of bed. That's how bad the addiction had become.
You really put pills in are you being serious, or?
Dead serious, man.
Wow.
Imagine going to bed knowing that when you wake up the next morning, if you don't have that drug to put in your body, you will likely not get out of bed because your bone ache will be so deep, your flu-like symptoms will be so bad, you'll be, crapping yourself, throwing up, whatever. It's vicious, man. I don't wish opiate withdrawals on my worst enemy, and there's some people out there that I don't like. But the reality of the situation was I was withdrawing from opiates. I was sick. I needed drugs. I knew a guy that had some. They were in very limited supply at the time, so he was charging a premium dollar, and I didn't have it. So I basically was at a crossroads at that point. My life had taken such a terrible turn. We're talking about the backside of a decade of addiction, man. It wasn't like I got hooked on pills and a week later I was knocking over banks. This was something that, I don't want to say borderline suicidal because I was too much of a narcissist to ever consider offing myself. But I even with no money, no resources, all bridges burnt, I still somehow felt like I had something to offer the world. So suicide wasn't an option. But I was at the point where I realized there was really nothing for me. I had no plan. No network, family was gone, out of the picture, all bridges were burnt. I was just at the end of the road. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go rob a bank. If I successfully rob the bank, I'm going to take off, go to the other side of the country, go to rehab, restart my life away from everything that I know here and now. If I don't successfully rob the bank, I'll go to prison and I'll be forced into rehabilitation. Well, at that time, my subconscious mind took over and, flawed the bank robbery on purpose, I think, because I just knew there was no way I was getting out alive. As far as the addiction was concerned, I wasn't going to get better. So I stimulated an arrest and got myself thrown in prison. So
when you say stimulated the arrest, you went and did that.
I didn't actively say, I'm going to go rob this bank poorly because I want to go to prison, but my subconscious mind kind of knew that I was intelligent enough and highly capable of executing probably a pretty decent bank robbery if I spent some time to think about it. But I went home, threw a sweatshirt on with a hood, a bandana, glasses. I even stole sunglasses at a local gas station to wear into the bank, so I was on CCTV everywhere. It was a smash and grab job. I did it knowing that if I got away with it, I was meant to get away with it, and I was going to go start a life somewhere else. If I didn't get away with it, I was going to prison, and that's what my subconscious mind was optimizing for. I didn't know that I didn't know that then, but I can tell you now that I just knew there was no hope for me, so those are the actions that I took.
Were you armed during the robbery?
No, man.
You just walked in?
Just walked in. No letter.
Give me all the money.
Actually, I was much nicer than that, brother. I really was. I believe, and to this day, I can remember almost my exact words. I walked in, and everybody kind of looked up, and my heart was beating through my chest. Anybody that tells you that they're executing a bank robbery and they're calm, cool, and collected is full of it, okay? Your heart is beating through your chest. Your cortisol, your adrenaline are off the charts. You can barely see straight. Everything is just very, very intense, hyper intense. You're hyper aware. And then I realized I'm at the point of no return. I've entered a bank dressed as a bank robber. There's really not a way to talk myself out of this. This was well pre-corona. Nobody was wearing face masks at this time, okay? So I wasn't able to talk myself out of it at that point.
Can I open a checking account?
Yeah, right. I just want to make sure I don't spread germs. So I just looked at the ladies and I said, listen, I think it's very clear based on my attire, and I use the word attire, don't ask me why, what's going on here. I want you to take the money from your drawers and put it on the counter and fan it out so I can see that there's no tracers, no die packs. I used the phrase non-sequential bills. All right, sequential bills. I said, I don't want any sequential bills. I must have heard that in a movie somewhere. And I said, I want to see the currency, and I'm going to put it in a bag, and I'm going to leave. And no one's going to get hurt, and you're all going to go home and see your families. And then they all kind of looked at me. And that last little line, the nice part about it, I think kind of indicated to them that they weren't in any danger, so they didn't do anything. And then I was like, well, this is really going to suck if they say no, because I don't really have a gun and I have no other way to force these people into giving me money. So I'm just going to try again. And I said, I mean it, move. And then they started giving me their money. So it started working at that point.
Okay.
Not very well planned out.
So they spread the money out?
Yeah, fan out the money. I read somewhere on the internet that if you rob 3 bank tellers, it's a federal crime. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. You can fact check that. So I only robbed 2 bank tellers. I get just shy of $10,000, and out the door I went. You can literally go see this footage on Google. Like if you Google it and go to, I think, CNY Central New York, or News 10 Now or something like that, there's a video of old Lukester robbing a bank. It's definitely still there.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. And so then how did they catch you?
So it's funny that you ask, because I went 5 or 6 days thinking everything was fine. I was a nervous wreck for those entire 5 days, but every day that went by, I was waking up, I would hear the kids come in through the door and think that it was the police knocking. I would wake up and...
So you had kids at the time?
I was with a woman. She had kids. And I didn't do any of these actions when the kids were in the home, but they would, come over in the morning from their dad's house, and I would hear the door knock and be like, oh my God, this is it. It's the cops. They're coming for me. And then I would look out and see the little kids and be like, okay. Day 1 down, then day 2, then day 3. Then finally, once I got to the point where I was like, I think I got away with this. So I went to the DMV with some of my earnings, if you will, and got my driver's license back, because I was a car salesperson. And the reason that I had myself convinced, part of the reason I was in such dire straits is because I had lost my license and I wasn't able to sell cars, so I couldn't monetize the way I was used to.
You're not able to sell cars without a license?
It's very difficult. Go into a car dealership and say, hey, I want to sell cars. And they say, okay, do you have an...
You were in between jobs at that time?
Correct. Yep. That would be a nice way of putting it. So I wanted to get my license back. So I went in the DMV, and, I had that money and I was guarding it. I was hoarding it because it was all the money that I had, and I didn't know where the next penny was coming from. But once I got to day 4, day 5 with no arrest, I'm like, I successfully committed a bank robbery. Like, I got away with this. So then I took every penny that I had left, went to the DMV and the courtships around where I had the violations in, or the scoffs, and I paid to lift those and get my privilege to drive restored. Went to the DMV, got my temporary interim license, and was on my way home, and the police showed up and arrested me. So it was It was very bittersweet. I got my driver's license back. An hour later, I went to prison.
Did you? At least you know, had your license.
Yeah, and then they took it away a month in because I didn't make my court dates. So it was yeah, but it was what it was, man.
Did they say how they caught you?
Yeah. So eventually, what happened? We were in like a ranch. Like
So they pull up, they arrest you, and then what? They're just like, hey, you know what it is. They know what it is.
I went to the laundromat, left the laundromat, and I noticed, and it was funny because it was like an action sequence playing out. You ever watch an action movie and like the main character, once something starts to transpire that's pivotal in the movie, their mind then goes back and remembers all these moments where they saw the guy behind the tree. He was a cop. They saw the person up in the crow's nest at the football game. Oh, crap, they were a cop. Like they were realizing that they were under surveillance the whole time, and they didn't notice at that time. But when it all came to fruition, they had these flashbacks, and they do like a video montage. That's kind of what I went through at that time. Because there was an Impala, and it's like, I remember seeing that at the DMV, and then there was a Taurus with a little antenna on the trunk, and it was like, shit, I saw that at the laundromat. And then the person at the intersection I made eye contact with in a suit, shit, that was an undercover, and yeah, they'd been following me for days.
Oh,
at
wow.
that point, yeah. So what happened, we were staying in the area that I was from, Central New York. There's a lot of houses with basements, okay? And we were staying in a basement, we were staying in a house. The landlord lived in the basement and rented out the upstairs. And what I didn't know, because the landlord had a car and had dogs, and they were both, very pronounced. The car was in the driveway, the dogs would bark all the time. I came home to get dressed to go rob the bank because it was like 10 blocks from the place I was living at, go figure. And there were no dogs. There was no car in the driveway. So I'm like, okay, the landlord isn't home. So I walked out the door wearing the full getup that I wore to rob the bank. What I didn't know was the dogs were at the vet that day, and the car was in the shop, and the landlord was like in the backyard or the front yard gardening or laying out or doing something, and she literally saw me walk out of the house dressed in my full getup. So when they released the footage, and that's something that they never did, and they don't generally do, they'll show a picture of the robber at the counter. If you know this person, call the tips line or whatever, but they don't show the footage. They were releasing pictures, then clips, then the Thursday of that week, which was 4 days after the robbery, they literally released the entire closed circuit TV footage of the entire robbery, from me walking in, the street footage, the camera view from the vault, everything. And it was very obvious they had nothing. So they were throwing out all the stops. Like if anybody knows. And what happened is the landlord then looked at the picture and saw me walk, saw my gait, saw the way I walked, saw the way my arms moved, saw the outfit, and all of a sudden it just clicked.
Wow.
And her boyfriend at the time, from what I've gathered since then through my network, was I believe a retired county sheriff in the area. And she told him, she's like, I think the guy that robbed that bank is living upstairs. So he did some looking into it, discovered I had a criminal past, and put two and two together. And then there was 5 cars on my front lawn taking me off to the Hooskow.
Wow. That's crazy. So had she not reported, you probably would have,
Most
been
likely
10
would have
grand
gotten
deeper,
away.
and then probably would have gone and done more, right?
Absolutely would have done it again. I'd already made up my mind at that point. When I went to the DMV, I said, I'm going to go get my driver's license back. I'm going to sell cars, but the car selling is going to be my front because I'm going to go rob more banks. This was just way too easy. That was the mind of an addict.
So you had been in car sales before, and so it wasn't like you went to prison, got out, and were like, I'm gonna go sell cars.
No, I actually wanted to be a football player. I got a scholarship. Nothing crazy. No. I wasn't like Deion Sanders, but I was a decent athlete and I was a good student. So I got a full scholarship shy of like $3,000 to a Division II college, and I was going to go to school. I was going to be the first person in my family to actually go.
What school was it?
Utica College of Syracuse University. So it was like a Division II school of Syracuse University, which is a Division I school. So my plan was to go play football there. I was still kind of growing into my body. I was a late bloomer, so I was going to go there, play football, and then hopefully eventually move up to Syracuse University, which was a Division I school. Homecoming game, destroyed my shoulder, tried to play out the rest of the season, couldn't do it, ended up dislocating it, and I was a quarterback, so it was my throwing arm. We were a small school, so we played both sides of the ball. So the guy that was going to go to college as a quarterback on a football scholarship destroyed his shoulder playing defense and destroyed also his scholarship. So I learned very quickly that even though it was an academic scholarship, when you destroy your shoulder as a quarterback, all of a sudden your academic scholarship magically disappears. So,
wow.
Yeah, I couldn't go to school anymore, couldn't afford it. Parents, couldn't help me get student loans. And grandfather was a car dealer. Dad was a car dealer. It had been around me my entire life. It was kitchen table talk. I sold used cars out of my front yard for my dad, and I just knew the business, and I knew it would come easy to me. So I made the decision that a lot of kids make. I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to work. I'm going to bank some money, and then I'll try the college thing. But I found out I was very good at selling cars and made, I think, 72 grand at like 18 years old, which was a lot of money for Central New York.
So prison for you was kind of the wake up moment for you, or wake up call?
So what prison was is it was forced detox. Okay. So there's a lot of addicts that have recovered from drug addiction, on their own. They've gone to a rehab. They've, sweated out at their mom's house, that type of thing. I was so deeply involved and immersed in the usage of opiates that my body literally would shut down when I would try to get off the drug, to the point where I needed medical intervention. So I was convinced that there was no way I was going to detox on my own. So what prison was is it was the physical intervention. It literally locked me in a cage, so I had no choice, and made me sweat it out. And that's what I mean when I said earlier in the pod that my subconscious mind kicked in. I just knew, man. I've always been an intelligent guy and very logical and commonsensical. When addicted to drugs, obviously my decision making was a little suspect, but I just knew that I had to have some sort of intervention in order to get off the drugs. So the bank robbery for me was just my subconscious taking over and saying, "Listen, we're going to do something stupid. We're going to go to prison because that's the only chance you have." And this was right on the backside of several overdoses, man. Like this close to being done forever. So I had to do something. And I robbed the bank and I went to prison, and it was, quite frankly, it saved my life. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Don't they have ways to get high in prison? Like
they do.
What, you like take toothpaste and you sniff it or something like that?
Not quite that. No, they have a drug trade inside the prison the same way there's a drug trade on the streets, man. People come into the visit rooms. Guards don't check the genitalia of everybody, so there's ways to sneak it in, and they let you kiss and touch and fondle in the visit room. So guys are in there and their women are bringing it in, or their men, or vice versa, or whatever, and they're getting contraband into the prison. And just like anywhere else in the world, brother, if you're a hustler and you find a way to get your money up in there, you can buy drugs just like you can on the street.
So what stopped you from getting drugs in there?
I was lucky enough to not have access to any while I was in county jail, which is the reception and the prep for going to state prison. So by the time I got to state, I had pretty much sweat the majority of it out. And I can tell you, if in the first week or two, of county I had access to opiates, I would have done it, and I would have been in the same situation. But luckily, listen, man, I'm not a believer in miracles or divine intervention, and I respect the people that are, but I'm a believer in actions cause reactions, right? So it was all my doing, but there was definitely some luck in the timing. There were certain things that took place at certain intervals that just optimized for me not having access. And in my weak moments, there was no access to drugs. In my strongest moments, there was access to drugs, and I was able to say no. So I was very lucky, man. To this day, I have the humility to say that there were events that transpired outside of my control that assisted me in recovering, because I couldn't have done it if I had access to the drugs. I wouldn't have. I wasn't strong enough mentally and physically. I was still very weak and under the spell of the opiates. So it's nothing I would have done on my own. So the way things transpired was apparently exactly how they needed to transpire to get me sober. And man, once you've gone down that road and you've recovered and you've gotten back and you've gotten your sanity and your health back after living that hell for 10 years, you will never go down that road again. You just won't. And I haven't.
How long were you in county before?
About I think it was 4 months.
So you did the majority in prison?
Yes, yep.
So you did, 4 months in county and 19 in prison?
I believe it was, no, actually, so I went to a shot camp, which got some time taken off the back end of my prison sentence. My sentence was a 1 to 3, which is an indeterminate sentence. And when you hear me refer in my social media to 2 years, that's 24 months collectively between county and prison. But there's another bit in there as well. I've been to jail several times. But that one stint in prison was about 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did about 4 months, and you did about 8 months in prison.
So it was a little more. It was about 11 months in state.
Okay.
Yep. So I guess, collectively it was like 15.
And the camp was part of that too? Or that,
the what?
That stint?
The shot camp. Yeah. So funny about the shot camp. So the shot camp is designed to help you go home early. If you're willing to admit that you have a problem and you're willing to go to the shot camp and, take some drill sergeant screaming in your ear for incessantly at 5 a.m. in the morning until the time you go to bed and calling you a maggot and making you do push-ups, all the paramilitary stuff that's designed to break you and rebuild you. If you can humble yourself and you can deal with that, they let you go home early. So, for instance, my sentence would have been, a little over a year, and they gave me the option of going to shot camp, which should have put me home in 6 months. However, in the reception, and that's what I mean with the intervention and timing and the things that happened, my paperwork somehow got screwed up in the reception of prison. And this is a real thing. Anybody that's been in the state prison system will tell you. There's guys that have been sitting in reception that should have gone home months ago because their paperwork hasn't gotten to the top of somebody's pile yet. And whether it's the bureaucracy of somebody coming in and, moving somebody's pile to the top because somebody called and pitched a legitimate bitch, who knows? All I know is I ended up not getting through the reception process and seeing my prison counselor for like 3 or 4 months after when I was supposed to. Then I agreed to the shock program, thinking that, okay, even though it's been an extra 3 or 4 months, I'll still go home 2 or 3 months early. When I agreed to go in the shock program, it was another month and a half until the bus came and shipped me up to shock camp. So I went through the 6 months of hell, and I ended up going home like 11 days early. Okay. When it was all said and done.
Not even.
So I paid the price, bro.
In what kind of prison was it? Was it there's different levels, right? And there's varying degrees of, there's one for the, I've heard people say like the bitches and snitches, and then there's one for like, the murderers and gangbangers.
Yep.
Like what kind of spot were you at?
So bitches and snitches go to protective custody. Okay. White collar criminals like the Jordan Belforts of the world, they go to federal camps because they get served federal time. Federal camps are known to be much easier going. They have video games, email, computers, couches. Like it's, I've never been, so I don't want to speak to it.
It's
but
a camp.
It's a camp. It's literally called a federal encampment. And then you have low security, medium security, max, and super max. The reception facility that I was in was a supermax. It was like Shawshank. You walk down the galley, it's 4 stories high, 8 galleries, people throwing urine and feces and lit cigarettes at you, screaming, telling you they're going to take your ass in the shower, like everything you could possibly imagine. So that's what I went through, and that's what I mean when I say it kind of sucked that they misplaced my paperwork because I spent a significant amount of time in reception. Most guys are in there for, 2 weeks to 45 days and then out. I spent months and months in that supermax. And having it be a nonviolent felony and my first felony offense, I shouldn't have done that time there. But, dude, listen, I'm cool with it. It was what it was, right? It certainly built me into who I am today. But it was a supermax facility. And then the shock camp is actually a minimum security facility. So when you're granted that program, and when you say minimum security, people think, oh, they take it easy on you. No, it was hell on earth. There just was no fences and barbed wire. That's what a minimum security facility is. Yeah, well, yeah, it's like imagine like a boys' camp with dorms and gymnasiums and woods and trails and all that kind of stuff. It's exactly that, but with absolute walking nightmares as counselors. Okay, running you 5, 10, 15 miles a day. I remember one day we did 2,000 jumping jacks as a disciplinary measure. Like it's hell on earth. But it works. It's corrective in its action. That's for sure. I'll never go back there again. But minimum security in that there are no fences. Now there's a guy with a gun, and if you take off, you catch one in the back of the head. So I don't know if I'd rather have a fence or a bullet, but it's not necessarily that minimum. But it's just the designation: minimum, no fence; medium, fences, guards, and mediocre security. Max, you're talking 30-foot wall or 30-foot high concrete walls, crow's nests, guys with sniper rifles, like Shawshank Redemption type thing.
In the camp, I bet if everyone ran, they probably couldn't get everyone.
They'd be screwed. Yeah. Nothing you could do. They would call in the dogs. But it's, man, people get so institutionalized when they've been in those places. I know guys that you could be like, dude, you can run right there, right now. Go home, see your wife and kids. They'd be like, yeah, they'll get me and end up putting me back here anyways.
Which is probably true.
It is, to an extent. But you're also like, man, where's the alpha in you? Where's the man that wants to go, right? I want the hell out of here. And there was a few times, man, on a work program where I'm like, tapping my fingers, the keys are dangling in the ignition, everybody's outside working. I was allowed to go back and smoke a cigarette because I smoked in prison because it was the only thing to do. And I definitely almost hopped that bus a couple times, but we didn't do it.
Any fights or anything, any crazy prison stories?
I can't really speak to that. I can tell you that I experienced all prison has to offer. And it got pretty dark at moments, but there's some things that would
You're a pretty big dude. What do they call the guys at the top? The bosses or whatever?
Well, that's when you're in the gang dynamic. I chose not to participate in that. Now, when you're sentenced to time at a prison, the guys that have been to prison or watching this show want me to tell the whole story. In the Supermax, if I was sentenced to time there, I would have had to engage in some sort of compartmentalization of people, right? I would have had to join some group, pretty much. Otherwise, the yard is segregated into the groups, and
by
if you're
race,
religion, gang affiliation, it's not always the color of your skin, but it's largely by race. And if you don't affiliate, you will be annihilated pretty much. And then you'll end up having to assimilate into some form, whether because somebody makes you their bitch or because you decide to go somewhere for protection, and you trade whatever for that protection. I luckily didn't have to experience that because I was in the reception side of things, where you still had killing and stabbing and fighting and raping and all that stuff. I wasn't forced into an affiliation because we were locked in ourselves a significant majority of the time. The only time we came out was for movements and work and stuff like that. So I wasn't required to kind of fit that dynamic.
Kind of like being in county, right? You're just in lockup waiting for the next thing.
I would say in the dynamic, maybe similar, but far more dangerous and far much more freedom to do things that are very less than desirable.
Well, dude, thank you for answering the question about prison.
Sure, dude, of course.
Obviously doing crazier things, but it's so interesting hearing that world. I think there's a fascination around prison too.
I agree.
In culture, because most people have never gone, will never go.
Yeah.
But it's why those shows like, Locked Up and what do they call it, 60 Days In, and all those shows are so popular. But I did hear that in prison you took time to read and develop. And so what was the thing for you when you came out where you're like, I'm going to go be the best freaking car salesman on the planet? Or what was your motive when you got out?
It's a great question. So when I was locked up, the minute I was able to get through a day without thinking about drugs all day long, and the fact that my bones ached and I was throwing up and getting sick to my stomach and crapping myself and all this undesirable stuff, once I started to gain some humanity back and some sense of self-worth, and I realized that there was going to be an existence outside of prison, because you question that for a long time when you've been dependent on drugs for so long, my mind started going to places it never went before. Like, I wanted to read. I've never desired to read literature in my life. I've always turned away from books. I don't want to read. I'll just watch the movie or the Cliffs Notes. Like, I got shit to do, right? When you're locked in a room, in a cage, and there's noise and chaos and violence and negativity just all around you, it is necessary to maintain your sanity to put your mind somewhere else. You cannot put your body somewhere else. You're going to be physically in that prison. But if you want to survive prison, you have to put your mind somewhere else. So books allowed me to kind of transcend to somewhere different. Whether it was reading a James Patterson novel, a Reacher novel, and just something as simple as feeling like my mind was involved in a good theater movie. But eventually I optimized for learning. I would find educational books. At first, I started reading out of the law library. I literally read criminal code because it was fascinating to me to learn. Originally, I was thinking like, George Young and Blow. It was like a criminal school. I wanted to become a better criminal, right? And then that kind of gets old, and you're like, you look around and you're like, I don't want to live amongst these people the rest of my life. So there's got to be something else. So then you get into self-development and you find a few self-help books, and then you can have people send in books from the outside. So I started, looking at what books could I use to develop myself in an entrepreneurial fashion. And I determined, because I had such a vast knowledge of the car business, and because I knew there was so much profit in used cars, and I knew that I was a strong salesperson, I figured I ultimately could guarantee myself successful business ownership and a used car dealership. The only thing I had to solve for was getting bonded, which as a felon is nearly impossible. I am now.
Getting your license, right?
Getting bonded to get your license. Yeah, in the state of New York, you have to have what's called a surety bond of $1 million in order to get your automobile dealer's license. And what that...
AKA so you don't screw people
Correct.
or
so
take
like,
titles or whatever.
Yeah, dude. So like if I'm a car dealer and you come into me and you buy a car from me and you trade in a car, and I've figured the payoff to that automobile into the financing, I get funded from the bank on the car that you purchased and the payoff on your car. Well, if I'm a snidely son of a bitch, then I just keep that money and I don't pay off your bank. And then you call me in 2 months and you're like, dude, why are they calling me telling me I owe them a payment? And it's, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Heard of CNC Motors? They're out of California. They did a lot of exotic stuff. They had a whole thing where they were, I don't know, maybe it's common. For me, it was shocking.
Yeah.
They call it like floating the titles or something.
Yeah, title floats. Yep.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. So they would, there's a lot of nefarious behavior in the car business, man. Quite frankly, if I had to align one business as closely to criminal behavior that I've had experience with that I could, it would probably be the used car business. I mean, these guys do some nasty, nasty manipulative stuff, man. And one of the reasons I enjoyed building my dealerships was because I kind of had this desire to prove my family and my peers wrong, which was they basically said, you're going to go back to your old self. You're going to be a manipulator. You're going to do all the same shit that other car dealers are doing, which is wrong. And I said, no, you can be a good, mindful, successful and morally sound used car dealer. Like, it can be done. So it was kind of like an intrinsic motivation to prove them wrong, but it was also a familiar environment to me. So, I just built that out. And when I was in prison, I started reading books on finance and self-development and how to successfully build a business and how to get bonded as a felon and all these things. And I just educated the shit out of myself, man, right down to how to put down a floor plan for a successful tangible asset business, like any information I could get. And unfortunately, when you get out, you realize that a lot of the information that you've read is dated because these are books that have been in the prison for 30 years, I'm looking at them and I'm seeing Commodore computers and the pictures of the books that I'm reading. But the ideas, were still resonating, and then the overarching principles were still there. And I learned a lot. I really did.
Is there a memorable book that you're like, this was like something that really changed for me?
So, certainly an individual who needs no additional fanfare, Grant Cardone. There was a book that I came across called The 10X Rule, and it wasn't when I was in prison, frankly. It was when I got out. It was a book I had heard of, I wanted to read, and my girlfriend at the time and now wife actually called Cardone's, and whether they were just gassing her up or it was reality. And I compared signatures later, so hopefully it's the real thing. But the guy's like, Grant's right here, says he'll, send you an autograph book right now. So I got an autograph book from Grant Cardone, which I thought was cool at the time. Not because of who GC is now, but because of the CDs that were in my dad's car when he was a car dealer back in the 90s. That's the Grant Cardone that I knew, and that's why I wanted to read the book. But when I read the 10X Rule, it was simply, and I'm not going to, not going to gratify him to the extent that it was well written or overly verbose or grammatically correct even, but it was simply the fact that someone was saying, listen, man, you put in 10 times more effort than anybody else, and you're likely going to get at least more, if not 10 times more result. And if you want to make $100,000 a year, shoot for $1 million, because if you fall short of $1 million and you get 335,000, it's still more than $100,000. And I'm like, man, that is so friggin' simple. And like I said, Grant needs no additional hoopla behind his stuff, but I like to give credit where it's due and pay homage to those that have helped me. And that book definitely was a mindset shift for me. There have been many others, but that was the first one that I remember that really stuck out.
So you get out of prison, you go get a sales job somewhere?
So when I got out of prison, no, actually, I at that time, and it's funny because I know I just told the thought process of wanting to open a car dealership, but the desire was to open the car dealership, but my mind was optimizing for reality. I had no credit, no resources. I couldn't get bonded, so I wasn't thinking about opening a car dealership. So you went straight to
robbing more banks.
Robbing more banks, yeah. Actually, I was hitting ATMs at this point. No, I actually answered an ad in and I think it was Craigslist or like Indeed or something like that for a collision center, because it was in the automobile industry. It required some selling, but basically this collision center was going to train you to be a collision estimator, and then you were going to, by virtue of on-the-job training, become a licensed collision estimator. And there was some good money in that. I knew I could make 80 to 100 grand a year. It wasn't selling. I didn't have to be manipulative, and I was going to do that. So selling was not what I was optimizing for at that time. I went to work at that place. 3 weeks in, I was crushing it for them because they had me start by learning collision estimating, but then they overheard me selling a detail to a customer, and they were like, dude, you got to be in sales. So they then put me in selling retail bodywork, wholesale bodywork, and then within 3 weeks, he was giving me a store that was suffering in his organization to build out and become the general manager of. So I'm a felon 3 weeks out of prison, and I'm being given a store to become the general manager of, to try to rebuild it and grow it and scale it. And unfortunately, local members of the business community kept coming in and seeing me and then going to him and be like, did you know that's the guy that robbed the bank? And he didn't know that. I put it down on my job application, but he eventually came to me and he's like, dude, everybody's...
past experience?
Yeah, it was right on my resume. Call the
Did you really
correction
put that on
center.
your resume?
No, they ask you if you've ever been convicted of a felony.
Yeah, you put yes.
Yeah, I said, yeah, bank robbery, robbery third, da-da-da-da-da. So it was definitely there. And he just, came to me one day. He's like, here's your check. Here's a little extra, to help you out. You've been good to us, but I can't have a bank robber working here. And I'm like... if you had any idea what some of your guys working out back have done and what they're doing right now. But I'm like, whatever, man. I don't want to be where I'm not wanted, so I'm out of here. And then almost in that same moment, somebody reached out to me from my past who was a nefarious actor, but also he knew how to make money. And he's like, listen, man, I know that you just got fired. A little birdie told me, I'll give you a checkbook. I'll give you a dealer plate. I've got a car dealership that I started while you were in prison. It's not doing well. I'm not a good car dealer. I've learned this. So I'm going to go back to my 9-to-5 selling cars. I want you to run my car dealership. We'll split everything down the middle. So I'm like, holy shit, right? Like, how often does an opportunity like that come along? And it was like 2 days after I got fired. So I went to my girlfriend at the time, and she's like, you know, what are you doing? That guy's a drug addict. You know that. He was hooked on the same drugs that you're hooked on, and he's still using them. Like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, this is a great opportunity. And the addict, the manipulator in me started coming out and, you know, trying to manipulate her into seeing the light like I was seeing it. And she just warned me that he was going to screw me over, and she eventually was right. I engaged with him. And the reason I did was because I told him, I'm like, dude, I can't do this because I don't have a driver's license. He says, take my Amex, pay off all your fines, get your driver's license. He's like, I know the investment's going to be worth it. I know what you're worth. I know what you can do. So he did, and I did, and I paid him back in the first month and went on to make a ton of money in like 6 or 8 months working for him. But he just was insane, man. He just was. He was nuts. He would come in and cut up Oxycontins on the table in front of me and snort them and be like, all right, man, so what are we doing today? How are we doing this, that, and the third? And eventually, then he started messing with my money. You know, I was well acquainted with one of the young ladies at the bank, and she explained to me that there was like no money in his checking account one day. And I'm like, well, I just deposited 60 grand on Monday and another 40. And she's like, Luke, it's a sinking ship, GTFO. And I was like, all right, appreciate the information, deuces, and off I went. So now I'm in the point where like I had a taste of entrepreneurship. Like I built this guy's business for him, and we went from a Winnebago trailer on a gravel lot in Oswego, New York, which is extremely rural out by a lake, and we ended up migrating towards the suburbs, and we had a building and 2 garage bays and lifts and a mechanic and a detailer and like 50 cars on the lot. We were selling 30 cars a month, making a lot of money. So to walk away from that and after you've built something like that is very painful. So I went back to work. At the time, a guy reached out to me that I had actually worked for before and stole from him while I was using drugs. You know, he's very big on second chances. His success came off the back of a second chance. He reached out to me and said, do you want your job back here making 6 figures selling automotive, you know, aftermarket products? And I said, sure. So I started doing that. And that's when the magic came in. About 60 days into working for him, he came in and he's like, I overheard you talking to somebody about your deal in the car business with that guy. I said, yeah. He's like, you seemed like really fired up when you were talking about it, man. I was like, yeah, you know, I had a great time and I like cars and I love selling and I was building the business and man, and he just saw a fire ignite behind my eyes, the same fire that I've seen in other entrepreneurs that pay me to coach them now. And it's just something that's unmistakable. When you know somebody is passionate about what they're doing and they really enjoy something and that they're going to devote every ounce of their life and livelihood to that thing, he saw that in me. So he offered to invest for me to open my own car dealership. And that's how I got started as an entrepreneur.
Man, amazing. What makes someone so good at car sales?
Well, it's a many-faceted stone, sir. If I had to put it simply, I would say confidence and fundamentals. I have seen veteran car salespeople who've been selling their whole lives or, quote, selling their whole lives, just not reach anywhere near their potential because they believe selling is supposed to look a certain way. They believe a salesperson is supposed to sound a certain way, and they believe the sales process is supposed to go a certain way. I would rather have somebody who's completely virgin to the car business, never sold anything a day in their life, and just give them the correct fundamentals and the framework that we use today and Paid to Persuade, and just give them that asset, help instill confidence in them by correcting their mindset and giving them a framework of behaviors and professional bearing, and just set them off, man, set them off to the races, because somebody trained in that way will produce 10 times somebody who's a career salesperson who thinks they're good and is arrogant.
If 100 people walk in, it's a poor salesperson, not poor poor financially, but poor at sales, and someone who's crushing it, your level or maybe even better, if that even is possible.
Okay.
Right. What's the close rate? And 100 people going to an average person, 100 person going to a good.
So if 100 people enter a facility where you're saying an average salesperson is occupying, they're going to close at 25%. As far as the automobile industry is concerned. So new and used cars, they go, and there's a slight shift between new and used, obviously, because the marketing, the franchises, and everything.
New is higher.
New is generally higher because they're going in better informed. Used, there's just more nuance and variance to the products because they're all a little bit different. But call it 25%. Is your next question going to be if they walk into a sales showroom where the shooter is, what's the close rate going to be there?
If they walk in and you're there, yeah.
50%.
50%.
So if I'm there, it's going to be better than 50%. Okay. We're going to be 75, 80%.
What about Andy Elliott?
You'd have to ask
45?
Andy. Listen, man, Andy Elliott catches a lot of guff because he's polarized himself. He has a strict set of behaviors and beliefs. But a guy that makes 9 figures in business, you can't take anything away from that. I've been out to Andy's place. I've met his guys. I'm in actually communication with a lot of his employees. I've DM'd Andy back and forth. He and his wife have built a hell of a business. They're very nice people. And they've got a system, and it works for some people. You can tell there are people that have preached the success of the Andy Elliott training. It's just not how I sell. It's just not how I sell. And I feel there's a better way to do it. But listen, man, somebody's making that kind of money, they're doing something right.
How do you take someone from walking into a used car dealership to walking out with a car?
So number one, it's very, very aggressive qualification. So, you bring up Andy Elliott. Andy Elliott optimizes for something called word tracks, okay? So what they believe is that if you're not a seasoned salesperson or you're a rookie, I'm going to take sentences that are catchy and they get to a point, and I'm going to give them to you like bullets in a gun. And when your customer objects, you're going to pull out the gun, you're going to load the appropriate bullet or word track, you're going to cock it, and you're going to fire. And you've got a better chance at killing the prey with a bullet than you do with no bullet. Does that make sense?
It's like a jukebox. I want to listen to a certain track. You spin to it, you have some kind of script for every objection.
You're 1,000% correct. The efficacy of that, in my belief, is because, and I have been trained with word tracks before, and I can tell you this, when I received word tracks as a young, skilled, talented salesperson, I didn't improve. I just had different things to say, okay? So if you take somebody who's at 0 and give them word tracks, they'll get to 60, okay? So word tracks get somebody who's not effective to being effective. That's absolutely true, okay? When you actually bestow upon somebody a skill set that is their own, that they can then iterate upon with their own mindset, their own words, their own behavior, their own tonality, and their own vocabulary, they can remain authentic. And the frequency of authenticity, Dylan, is received by a human being at a 4 times stronger rate or at a 4 times higher volume than any other conversation we can have. So, for instance, what's your favorite thing to do? Let's say a hobby.
Oh, I'm training for an Ironman, so biking, running, swimming.
Okay. So if I start engaging with you in discourse about biking, running, and swimming, and I'm truly passionate about it, we're going to have a hell of a conversation. We're not going to want to walk away from that conversation, and we're going to somehow understand just intrinsically that we're having an honest communication and discourse because there is an unspoken frequency that happens, and it's true, and it's measured on scientific equipment. They've done studies with a Faraday cage, and they've solved for this. And there's something called the law of constructive interference, and that means that when you and I are speaking on a similar topic that we're both passionate about, we both emit a frequency. And when those frequencies meet and combined, it becomes exponentially more powerful. So if I'm a salesperson and I'm having a conversation with you and I use a word track and you say, hey man, I think I'd like to think about this and I'll let you know tomorrow. And I say, hey Dylan, isn't anything worth doing tomorrow worth doing today? What are you going to say?
Is that a word track?
It's a word track. What would Dylan Vanis say? What would you say to that? Dylan, anything worth doing tomorrow is worth doing today, isn't it?
I mean, so what I say when I get that, and when I work with people, is like, look,
real talk.
Today's, sure, we can go do that, and but today's going to turn to tomorrow, turn to next week, and this you're not going to have this car that I don't sell cars, but you're not going to have this that you've been trying to get, and that's real for me because I know that if I don't make a decision today, I'm probably never going to make the decision.
Okay.
So that resonates for me.
Okay.
But I think that ultimately what you're saying is that if we're being authentic, you're going to close better than just having these little jukebox scripts that you.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if you line up 10 people, okay, you're definitely an outlier. Obviously, you're a different individual than most. So it resonates with you. So we got lucky. And what I will tell you is that's why word tracks can be effective because plain and simple, the proof is in the pudding. With this individual, that was effective. But I can tell you for a fact, and it's research backed by myself and many other people in polls, that if you line up 10 people, that's going to work on 5 or 6 of them. And there's going to be 4 or 5 that are like, no, there's things that are worth doing tomorrow that are worth doing tomorrow.
Sure.
Right? So my point is, in the paid to persuade discipline that we teach, we solve for all the objections at the outset of the conversation, okay? So when you're selling, there's really only 3 things that can gate you from selling, really, that'll be objectionable. One is time, one is money, and one is third party. Either I don't have the money, I don't want to spend the money, the price is too high, I don't have the money yet, the check is coming in the mail, whatever. Time, I'm thinking about making this decision in the future, I'm waiting for my daughter to get home from college because she's the one buying the car, whatever. There's the second one, and then there's third party. I'd like to involve my wife. I'd like to talk to her about it. I'd like to, talk to my mechanic and see if he thinks it's a good idea, whatever. So we teach an individual how to solve for those at the outset of the conversation. So when they engage with the customer, they know at the outset of the conversation, number one, if they have an easy sale, okay? When you're selling with word tracks and you have an easy sale at the outset and you don't solve for it, you're gonna spend an hour or two with that customer, the same hour or two that you spend with every single customer to try to get to that same desired end, which is a closed sale. When you solve for it at the outset and you ask the series of questions and the customer's like, yeah, I mean, I would buy today if all those things met. Great, boom. And then you just bang, bang, bang. You optimize a quick discussion and conversation, getting right to the point with their product that they've optimized for, and you get them out the door sold within 15 minutes to a half an hour, depending on your industry, right? So you've now, just by virtue of that, solved for a major difference in increasing your time that you can spend in optimize for volume. You can now fit 4 or 5 additional sales into that day that normally you would have only done, 2 to 3 in. The second component of it is when you solve for the objections at the outset of the conversation, if there is an objectionable component, you then navigate the rest of your sale optimizing for solving that objection, right? So we have something that we call the 3 groups of pricing. So if you tell me that you need to talk to your wife, I'm gonna say, okay, Dylan, that makes perfect sense. I'm always gonna maintain agreement. Dude, I get it completely, Dylan. I mean, understandably, if I make a decision that's, financially strong without my wife, I'm probably gonna be in a world of crap too. So I appreciate it completely. But I do have to make you aware that we have something called 3 price categories at ABC Motors, and that means the following. We have something called 365 deals. That just means that any day of the year you can come in and get this pricing. There's no real substantial discount to it. It's just good market value. But the good news is the product's going to be available any day of the year at that price, so you can buy it whenever you want to. Then we have something that we call short-term or circular or ad deals. These are in newspapers, these are in print, these are in digital circulars. These are deals that we do in like sales. So for the period of 5 to 7 days, excuse me, you can get these incentivized prices. The inventory is relatively limited, but as long as you make a decision within 2 to 3 days, you can usually get that product still. So if you're looking at making a decision within a week, that's something that'll work for you. But Dylan, I have to make you aware that we have something called hot list deals, okay? Every morning we get an email from our management staff, our brass, okay? And they let us know about particular pieces of inventory that are optimized for same-day movement. They might be costing us money from interest in our floor plan. They might be things that are overstocked and that we want to get rid of. They might be something that has a pending deposit and we just want to sell it out from underneath that customer because we don't like them. Those cases are minimal, but it happens every once in a while. This is sales. The bottom line is this, sir. Those are the strongest deals that I can offer you. We can give you products sometimes at 30, 40, even 50% off. And when our customers get those real crazy deals that they write home about, they're those hot list deals, and they're the best savings that I can offer you. So just moving forward, Dylan, I just need permission of which categories of pricing that I can show you. So which would you like to see today? Okay. Now, as a human being, you just heard that you could get 30, 40, maybe even 50% off a product. All of a sudden, I think my wife would appreciate me getting a good deal and acting now instead of, talking to her about the 10% off I could have saved. So now I'm considering it. And if that customer is an individual who would come off that objection of having to talk to their wife, because some people will, and that's what a good salesperson does. It takes a no and turns it into a yes. But we've created a framework where they're now involved in FOMO, the fear of missing out. And they're like, you know what? I want to take a look at those hot list deals, okay, actually. And it's like, okay, Dylan, that's no problem at all. But you did hear me say that those are things that require same-day movement. Yeah? No, I heard you. Okay, great, no problem. I'll be glad to show you those. So then we move on. What we've done right there is we've solved for that objection, right? When we get to the end and I try to close you, I don't know, man, I think I need to talk to my wife. Dylan, don't you remember earlier in the conversation when I told you those real strong deals were gated by a same-day decision? Remember when I told you that? Yeah, I do. Okay, man, so if we want this product, we got to act now. And when you plant the seed early in the sale and you lay the framework through the entire process, that's when you can solve for those objections strategically, but you can only do that if you solve for the objection at the outset of the conversation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the difference, man. I can have word tracks and use those to insert into undesirable situations that come at the end of the sale, or I can just flush everything out at the outset and pattern my entire framework, my entire sales cycle all the way to the finish to try to solve for those if they're solvable.
Yeah, because you're going to pre-handle them and you're not going to have to come back to them at the end. Like, you already said that you could make a decision without your wife. Why are you bringing that up now?
Right.
Right. I like what you mentioned, which is the third party thing, which a lot of people don't realize. In all things, when there's disagreements, arguments, or conflict in relationships, a lot of times it comes to the third party. You know, it's so and so's girlfriend or wife that's the one, you know, saying you shouldn't hang out with Johnny anymore because of XYZ. So it's interesting to hear that also from a sales perspective. I haven't heard that a lot. So, you know, well said.
Well, thank you, brother. And frankly, there's a lot of things that I could bring into this conversation that you wouldn't have heard anywhere else. And I'm not here to toot my own horn. You know, this is a platform. I do want to speak about my company and the sales training that we do. But I can tell you this. There is a way of selling that has been the industry standard or the marketplace standard since Henry Ford put the first crank in the front of the Model T. I mean, you meet somebody, you gauge their interest in a product, you build rapport, you lightly qualify them, you show them a product, and then you sell the product. That's what salespeople think their job is to do, okay? So doesn't matter who the trainer is. If you don't shift the mindset and the fundamentals, you're never gonna optimize for the best outcome. The way we train salespeople is not to be product salespeople. It's not to be service salespeople. It's not to, although we build value, the appropriate level of value, so the value proposition is in the correct format to get the deal, we still do that. We're not focusing on that, man. 85 to 90% of buyers have made a buying decision before they even engage with a salesperson. They know what they're doing, okay? They're too well informed nowadays. They can find out what the interest rate is from their credit union online. They can find out what the invoice cost of an automobile is on the website, right? They can figure out what their trade-in is worth within $500 on Kelley Blue Book, Edmunds, NADA, TrueCar, Carvana. Like, the resources are there. People know walking through the door roundabout what's going to happen. So the days of selling a product or a service are over, okay? The days of selling a relationship, compassionate interrogation, discourse with another human being, and optimizing for just saying, hey, Mr. Customer, here's the deal. I understand your needs, okay? You understand I'm here and I have a job to do, which is sell you a product and make money. But my job is to take you from start to finish with as much compassion for your time as possible. I know you know what you need. My job is to hold your hand and walk you across the finish line and optimize for time. And I just need your permission to do that. And when the customer walks away feeling as though that has been the interaction, okay, I walked in. Yeah, I know he's got to sell me something. He knows I'm here to buy something. Like, we got that done in the first 5 minutes. From there, it was just a conversation, man. We just talked about some stuff. He asked me a few questions about what my needs were. I engaged him. I shared with him some information that I had based upon my research. He then showed me a few options, and we got it done. No big deal. Good review, long-standing relationship, repeat and referral-rich career. That's what we're doing, dude. And that's what Paid to Persuade is all about. We call it compassionate interrogation, and we call it flow selling because it's fundamental, logical, and obvious.
So that's your program that you're talking about. I think you're building it out. You're getting ready to launch pretty soon here, right?
Actually, we have launched. So we're kind of in this phase where I guess you would call it kind of a soft opening, right? So I'm doing kind of a media tour. I'm talking to a lot of people. We're engaging with some marketing partners, and we're just really putting the feelers out there to see what makes the most sense. I'm not going super marketing heavy at the outset because this is a new territory for me, right? If we're building a car dealership, I can give you the action plan and we can execute now. But what I'm interested in doing, man, is I'm interested in optimizing for penetration and also value, right? Like, this is a business that I'm building based upon the value that we bring the consumer, our customer, okay? I'm not interested in trying to cram as much volume and tenacity and bombastic social media reels down everybody's throat that I possibly can. I'm interested in engaging people who are highly engaged in the desire to get better, who want to shift their mindset, who understand that we live in a different marketplace now than we ever have before, and they want to be exponentially better and operating at a different level than other individuals in the marketplace, okay? Our sales training is not gated by a $99 a month subscription or a $200 a month subscription. You can't engage with us in that way. You're gonna spend a decent chunk of money to engage with us, and I'm not talking 10 or 20 grand, okay? It costs a couple $1,000s to engage with this company and get our entire scope of sales training. I mean, the whole platform from start to finish, everything, okay? There are other ways to engage with us. There's coaching, there's calls that I host where people get a tremendous amount of value. And quite frankly, Dylan, you know just as well as I do, not everybody has the ability to spend $2,000 right now. So it's not like if you don't have 2 grand, you can't learn from us and you can't get better. We just have vehicles that you can access that will get you better, just not quite as quickly as engaging with us in our entire platform. However, if somebody does spend the money to get our online training platform and engage with us, we are the only sales training company, as far as I know, definitely in the United States, as far as I know, the world, that guarantees efficacy. If you do not get better when you learn from our company, we will give you your money back because we don't want it.
So how can people work with you and sign up with this stuff?
100%, man. So paidtopersuade.com is our website, okay? And again, from the marketing standpoint, we're trying different models of the website. So, they're not going to go see some illustrious, beautiful website right now. They're going to see a very simple informational page. But on that page, it has the assets that anybody would need to potentially engage with a company. There's testimonials, there's media and social proof, there's podcasts that I've done, there's, I mentioned customer testimonials, there's information, there's samples of the material. And quite frankly, Dylan, people can follow me on social media and get a tremendous amount of free value, and I'm not trying to shamelessly plug, my Instagram at Luke Lunk. But what I am doing is making sure that people who don't have the money to engage understand that they're not excluded from learning from our company, right? On a daily basis, we release 2 to 3 videos that are live in classroom training. And the difference, brother, and I take a lot of pride in this, between myself and other competitors in the industry, they're dropping videos that are optimized for views, okay? They're dropping videos that are very polarizing, that upset a lot of people because they want that virality aspect to it. They just want people to see them, and they believe by people seeing them, it will then bring them to their funnel, and that's how they will get the business. And quite frankly, it does work, okay? But we're taking the approach of we're putting content out there that's valuable. We're giving segments of the training where I actually drop knowledge bombs, where I give instructions, where I give methods, where I give free bits of our sales training to the masses. So you can literally follow my social media and get probably 25% of our entire training platform just in the words that I speak. Meaning, when you see me execute on this information and on the training in the training classes, you will then know what the method is and you will see it done in real life. So following us on social media is very valuable. And it's Luke Lunk on Instagram and Meta, Luke Lunk on LinkedIn, TikTok, paid to persuade, paid the number 2 persuade on YouTube. And we've got long form YouTube videos where we're not showing our highlight reels. We're not showing cute videos that sound good. We're showing sales training, and it's stuff that people can use that is actionable and will help them get better. So, long answer to your question, but I hope we provided some value.
Yeah, man, dude, this has been great. I appreciate you coming on. You already shared all the places to connect with you, so we'll drop them in the show notes. If you're listening, you can find them, or if this is on YouTube, they're in the description. Anything else to share before we wrap up?
Nah, dude, just don't underestimate yourself. Where's the camera? Is it right here? Don't underestimate yourself, guys. You're talking to a guy that's a felon, that was a drug addict, that spent 10 years doing nothing with my life. A shift in mindset and a decision to take action, it changed my life fundamentally, and I've become one of the many millionaires on social media, right? It's that word is so overused and played out. I hate to use it, but people want to hear it, right? So looking at a guy who's been to the darkest doldrums that I have and is now experiencing this level of success, man, if I can do it, Dylan, I promise you anybody can do it.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, brother. Appreciate you having me.